To answer the two questions that are probably going through your head, number one, yes, we are out of all the setup stuff. Now we're going to get into the things you're probably most interested in, which are things like price and distribution and the really more fun stuff. Second question is, Dr. Chow, what happened to your hair? Where did it all go? Yeah, I got to pull back in a ponytail. Because sometimes while I'm talking, it goes all over the place. So I have to take care of it. I'm hoping by the end of the summer it gets long enough that I can finally donate it, and then I'm going to look kind of goofy. Anyway, out of the 4 Ps that we've talked about, and these are the knobs that you turn as a marketer, is price, product, place, and promotion. Place means distribution. Out of the 4, what has the biggest impact on sales and profit? And the answer is actually distribution. Price comes number 2, product 3, and promotion 4. However, for digital products, that may have very well changed. But the reason why distribution is the most important aspect is because the way you distribute your product is basically, how do I touch my customer? So whether it's your website, whether it's who you pick to be your middleman, like Walmart to sell your product, or whether you do directly, that entire action of distribution pretty much makes or breaks you. Not only that, but if you have a physical product, think about the cost of distribution, warehousing and everything else. So unless you do that well, you can see where your profits are going to basically go on the cracker. Anyway, out of the 4 Ps though, the one that's most emotional is price. This is the one we can all relate to and understand. And so the entire concept of this is people pay based on perception. How much value they perceive is there is what they're willing to pay. The question becomes, what drives perception? The second approach of how companies set price is based on profit, meaning, obviously, if I can make it for $10, I'm not going to sell it for $5. It was kind of funny because I was in a startup, and at the time it cost us $1,000 to make one of these devices, and then our CEO decided to sell it to the military for $500, and I'm like, what are you doing? And it's like, economics 101. If you want to make a profit, sell it for a price higher than what it costs for you to make it. And so that's the second way we come pricing. And that's, people will talk about pricing all day long, but it really all just boils down to that. The thing about the 4 Ps is that everything has to play together. You have to understand what situation you want to look at, who are your customers, and what is my strategy going to be. And subsequently, based on that, and a lot of that comes out of the 5 Cs, I can set what my objective is. And subsequently, that plays into the 4 Ps. The thing is, again, the 4 Ps all have to work together. When you do your final projects, one thing I'm going to be looking at is how well your answers are coordinated. And I've run into this before, where one person will write something that is totally contradictory to somebody else, and so they got dinged on it. Because that shows an understanding that all this has to work in harmony. Again, if I'm selling a luxury car, how do I want to distribute it? Well, I'm not going to sell it online. People are going to want to try it out. When people walk into that showroom, they want something nice and glitzy. Subsequently, if I have a really glitzy dealership, but I'm selling at really cheap prices, it's sort of like I'm wasting money because the perception isn't the same. It all has to play together. And subsequently, what supports the 4 Ps, what impacts it, is the technology. How does it impact the way you do things digitally, and how do I innovate these processes? So the thing is, price works both ways, and that's it. It determines your bottom line. But value flows to you, but you also flow value back to the customer. Again, it's very emotional. And the thing is, pricing is mostly affected by who's my customer, what kind of options does he have, how does my competition impact what I do, and how can my company impact pricing, such as like bundling other products together. And so essentially what pricing does is it's affected by the 5 C's. The 5 C's all affect pricing one way or another. So pricing, really, there's just 2 approaches to it. There's value or market pricing, and there's cost-based pricing. And so what value pricing is basically compared to the perceived value, how much are they willing to pay? A good example of this was actually XM Radio. When XM Radio first came out, they were charging $19.95, and I actually knew the guys in business school who were responsible for that program and launching the satellites and everything else. And I said, you guys are pricing this too high. They said, oh no. He said, we did research in this and all. I said, this is why you're pricing it too high. At the time, and this is before the age of widespread cell phone integration in the United States at that time had only been about 40 to 50%. People paid $19.95 a month for their phones. That's the reference point. See how this stuff keeps coming up again? That's the reference point people associated with the phone. So do you associate the same value with something I used to get for free on radio and XM Radio? And they said, and as it turns out, the early adopters all bought in. Like, for example, if you are a trucker on the road for 12 hours a day, yeah, it'd be worth it to you. But what ended up happening is they hit the chasm. They hit the chasm because people thought, no, $19.95 is too high. And at the time they asked me, where do I think you should price it? And I said, it's got to be below $10. Subsequently, they dropped the price down to $9.95, and it took off again. And again, that's how they crossed the chasm. They did it by price. Cost-based pricing is about how much of a profit do I want to make? And this is about physical products typically. And that's that if it costs me $5 to make, the rule of thumb is you have to have at least a 50% margin. And a 50% margin means you're selling it double for what you're making it for. Now, can companies collude on price or salary? Yeah, they do. They do it all the time. And that's that they look at what someone else is doing and they just match. They just match. They just stay with them. They're going to compete on other ways, but they want to make pricing neutral. Again, pricing is driven by the 5 C's. In terms of your company, where can I price to maintain my advantage? Collaborators, how can they reduce my costs? Or co-promoters sell with me? My customers, how elastic are they? What other options do they have? My competition. Can I set up barriers of entry that are immune to price? And long-term contracts do that. And finally, context. Are there going to be big global events or changes that's going to change how I can price things? For example, if you're selling a product in the United States, all of a sudden that product becomes popular in a place like China and they make it for a lot cheaper and they start marketing it in the United States, you're in trouble. So the thing is, in terms of, so now we're going to go through the 5 C's, and the first one we're going to start off with is customer analysis. And so customer is interested in what is the economic value of the product to the customer, EVC. And so what you're looking at is what the response is. And so the way I get a response out of customers is I can go with one of 3 strategies. I can go with penetration pricing, which is low pricing. I could do neutral, which they deem as fair. Or I could do skimming or premium pricing. And that's I'm going after customers who have who are inelastic, who are insensitive to insensitive to pricing. And that's the example is dog food. Like, for example, if you want to mass market and you want to sell dog food to everybody, then it's like Alpo or something like that. If I have medium range and I just want my dog to be healthy, which is what Dr. Cho is, you'll buy brands like Ukanuba or what do we buy? I don't know, Wolf something. And then you've got those, hoity-toity people who are, the dog food they're selling is better than human food. Anyway, this is economic value to the customer. And here's an example that you as a company, say there's a product already out there that sells for $1,000. But what it comes down to is my product has smaller startup costs. My product doesn't cost as much to maintain. My product cost also has more features that I could sell for $100 more. Now all of a sudden the difference between my product and my competitor's product in terms of earned value is I've got $600 extra to play with. What do I do with it? And what a lot of companies will do is they'll use it to spur sales, meaning they'll give kickbacks to their distributors or things like that. I shouldn't say kickbacks, but incentives to their distributors or whatever. Or maybe I just keep it for myself. So those are the two things that they typically do with it. Take Apple Computer, for example. Apple sells iPhones in Target, and they sell it online. So the question becomes, gee, if they sell it online, the cost to them is very little. If they sell it through Target, then they have to pay Target, so they make less profit. However, the price is exactly the same. And the reason why they do that is because they don't want to get in fights with Target. Because if they drop the price down, and they can because they don't have all this added cost, Target will get upset with them, so they keep the price the same. The thing is, this extra they're making online in terms of profit, what do they do with it? Do they share it with you? No. It goes into cash. So you have to decide if you want to keep it or lose it. Now, we've talked about elasticity before, and that's that based on a change in price, how is that going to affect the change in quantity that I'm going to be able to sell? And a good example of that is if you're out in the desert and you have no water and somebody comes along with water, you're going to pay that $1,000 for a cup of water. You're inelastic at that part because you're dying. By the same token, I went to dinner with a friend of mine who, successful entrepreneur, millionaire. I actually helped him commercialize a product, so he took me out for a steak dinner. So we're having this very lovely dinner. And he asked for extra sour cream. And so they brought the extra sour cream, and they told him that, oh, by the way, that'll be extra. He's like, what? And he said, oh, yeah, we charge 50 cents more for sour cream. And then he just went livid. And for the rest of the night, all he could talk about was the damn sour cream. And the reason why is, even though he was, rich, and at one point I just threw $1 on the table and said, look, I'll pay for the damn sour cream. Just let it go. And he said, no, I'm not going to let it go. It wasn't so much that the money meant anything to him. Again, it comes back to this perception of fairness. But as you could see, my friend was very elastic. And actually, this is the key to wealthy people. Wealthy people make good deals. And it's all about whether or not they feel like they're getting ripped off or not. And that's how they create value. And so the question is how elastic or inelastic are my customers going to be to price? And so the way I can measure response is I can see how customers respond to price changes. I can do experiments. And these experiments are either I can apply it, meaning set up an experiment and see what they do, or I could take data that already exists and look at patterns and see what happens. And those are considered to be observed studies. But what I'm interested in is my customer preferences. And so these are controlled and uncontrolled tests. And so I can see my price response based on actual purchases or based on preference and intentions. And these are the techniques that people use. Conjoint analysis. There's something called part worth utilities, and that's I set up an arbitrary value related to some value, and that's how I can figure out what customers value and what they're willing to pay for it. The thing is, granted, it can be arbitrary. Sometimes you do sub-tests to get the data to feed into the conjoint model. But what you do is, by adding those values, you can figure out how they're going to respond to certain features. Like, for example, I could rate 100 points of price, like $3,000 for an air conditioner. I think a $1,000 drop, customers will value that twice as much. So I give a value of 50 points. And so I go about in doing that. Subsequently, based on that, I pretty much assign the 50 points is worth $1,000. And so here's an example of car engines where they assign certain values. And so subsequently, I can take different options. And now that I have this point system, I can plug in the points and figure out how much money I'm at, what they actually prefer, and how much money that actually impacts. So the thing is, what impacts elasticity, and these are some of the variables that go into it, and you can read that, and that's that I'm willing to pay more just because I don't want to switch. I don't want to have to go out and find a new vendor. So if you raise your price on me, yeah, I'm probably going to stick with you. And they know that. They know you have switching costs. What sunk costs are is I've already spent this money, so what's my profitability move forward? And most people are really bad about that. They keep thinking about the past, and companies take advantage of that, even though logically it doesn't make any sense. Because the money's gone. There's nothing you can do about it. Can I share costs with somebody else? And so here are the examples. They surveyed 367 businesses, and this is what their elasticity is. The thing is, some of these have really big spreads, like standard industrial products. It all depends on how critical it is, the volume, the size of the product, and everything else. But this kind of gives you an idea of what the elasticity is. And as you can see, airlines are very widespread, 1 to 5. And the reason why is because do you find Virgin Airlines or do you fly Southwest? Interestingly enough, advertising only has an effect of 0.22. Advertising essentially is very expensive for not a lot of return. In terms of customer types, earned value, product use, geography, marketing phase, these are all price segmentation variables we can use. Yes, there's even segmentation in price of who's going to pay more and who's going to pay less. But these are the variables that you can look at in order to segment that space. How do I defend it? Well, do you price a lot according to preferences, like ebooks versus paper? The thing is, in the early days, ebooks were dirt cheap versus paper. And once people started buying ebooks, they started lifting the price up because they found out people's preference was ebooks. And so now they don't drop the price on you anymore, and it costs just as much as paper. Is there discrimination that you can institute? And that's like old people, for example. You have early bird dinners. The thing is, your transaction prices shows the willingness of how much they're willing to pay. And so, summarizing about the customer, you have to determine what the qualitative value of your product is against your competition. And that's that. How do you measure yourself? What do you measure yourself against? Because that's about reference pricing. You have to figure out what the economic value is to the customer if you have that kind of used product, like in production. Determining elasticity, that is, and that's what big corporations do. They figure out what the elasticity is of the customer, and then they look at demand. For example, one of the biggest fallacies on earth is that oil companies want to drill for more oil. No, they don't. The reason why is somebody did a profit curve, and they found out that if they drill for more oil, then guess what? The price of oil is going to drop. And if the price of oil drops too much, And basically they're doing more work for less profit. They don't want to do that. They want to work at the optimal point of supply and demand. And that's the silliness of when people in politics said we want to be energy independent. We were energy independent. In the 1950s, this country actually produced all the energy it needed through oil. So what happened? What happened is they started selling it for cheaper in the Middle East. That's why people started buying Middle Eastern oil, because it was cheaper. So they didn't have to buy in the United States anymore. And so it's all about elasticity. And then finally think about how you're going to segment your market. So we'll continue on with the C's in the next lecture.